Human battleships were the galaxy's thermonuclear chainsaw, and reptilian Sire-Father Gargalac was about to start it up and bring it down on his own scaly head. In the Zeta Reticuli system, bursts of railgun fire and missile contrails flashed between the warships of the Gamelon Empire and the Andromeda Alliance, transforming the starry void into a cauldron of death. On the bridge of his dreadnought, the GES Sire-Father's Wrath, Gargalac growled at the tactical display. His claws sunk into the command chair as the ship rumbled under Alliance assault. "Sire-Father," hissed his second, Commander Koznak, as another volley struck deflector shields. "We face the combined fleets of 5 Alliance races. I urge you to reconsider this course." "The Gamelon Empire will no longer tolerate the Alliance's insolence," Gargalac snarled, saliva dripping from his fangs. "For decades they have opposed our righteous expansion. Today we put an end to that. Today we seize their worlds and enslave their people." "Today we bleed," Koznak said. "A prolonged war will cost us dearly. There are rumors the Alliance has contacted the humans and—" "Humans," Gargalac snorted. "An inferior species. If those Terran barbarians enter this war, we will crush them too." Gargalac believed his own hype, but every sane being in the galaxy knew the truth. It was humanity that did the crushing. In every conflict where human battleships had been unleashed, their enemies were annihilated with appalling swiftness. Containing enough firepower to glass planets crewed by warriors who killed without mercy or limit, they embodied death itself. The Kuzkasha had barely survived first contact. Now only the desperate or stupid would dare summon them again. Yet across the stars, the Andromeda Alliance was doing exactly that. And once the human warfleet arrived in force, the galaxy would burn. The battle raged on. The Gamelons unleashed a barrage of biotechnological missiles. Each missile was armed with a payload of lethal nanomachines, programmed to infiltrate Alliance ships and subvert their systems from within. The missiles streaked through the starry void, weaving past the Alliance's desperate defenses. Aboard the Alliance ships, crews watched in horror as the missiles slammed into their hulls. The nanomachines swarmed through bulkheads and access tunnels, devouring circuitry and corrupting code. Lights flickered and systems malfunctioned as the insidious infestation spread. The Alliance fought back with their most advanced weaponry. Quantum-entangled torpedoes and graviton pulse cannons flashed through space, tearing into the Gamelon fleet. Shields flared and armor buckled under the onslaught. Both sides began taking heavy losses as the battle descended into a brutal slugging match. On the bridge of the AAS Unity, the Alliance leaders looked on in dismay as the tide turned against them. A strangled gasp rose from the tactical station as the officer monitoring the fleet status reported grim news. "Admiral, we've lost the KSS hive mind. The nanomachines. They've taken control. It's attacking our ships." The Admiral's eyes widened in shock as he saw the Kuzkatka ship, now infested by Gamelon nanites, open fire on its former comrades. The monstrous betrayal sowed chaos and destruction amid the Alliance formation. The Kazakit K Admiral slammed a chitinous fist on his console. They were outmatched. The Gamelons had them surrounded and their fleet was being decimated. There was only one desperate option left. With a heavy heart, he gave the order to send a distress signal to the United Terran Confederation. May the ancestors forgive him for what he was about to unleash. Light years away, in a UTC outpost on the fringes of Zeta Reticuli, Commander Justin Robertson studied the readouts of the distress call with a grim expression. The scarred, grizzled veteran had seen his share of brutal conflicts, but this was something else entirely. The Gamelons were on the verge of a major victory, one that could shift the balance of power in the region and allow them to threaten human interests. Robertson weighed his options carefully. He had standing orders to intervene in situations that jeopardized Confederation security, and if the Gamelons gained a foothold here, the consequences for humanity could be severe. But he also knew the risks of escalation. To send human battleships into the fight could ignite a powder keg that set the whole sector ablaze. It was a decision that could reshape the face of the galaxy. Back at the battle site, the situation was turning desperate. The Gamelon ships had the remaining Alliance vessels surrounded. Aboard the Sire-Father's Wrath, Gargulak watched the tactical display with predatory hunger. The Alliance fleet was crippled, their losses mounting with every passing minute. Victory was within his grasp. "Prepare boarding crews," the Sire Father hissed to his subordinates. "I want prisoners to torture and new slaves to replace those we have used up, and send a message to the homeworld. Today we cement the supremacy of the Gamelon Empire." As the crew scrambled to obey, the Alliance leaders huddled aboard the battered Unity, staring at the view screens in despair. The enemy had them boxed in. It was only a matter of time before they were overrun. In these final moments, each said silent prayers to gods they feared had abandoned them. Suddenly, a klaxon blared. Proximity alert. A massive wormhole was opening up near the Gamelon Armada. Every head turned to watch as a colossal shape emerged from the rift, a silhouette that struck terror into the hearts of spacers across the galaxy. It was a human dreadnought, the UTCS Titan, one of the infamous UTC battleships. And standing on its bridge, coldly surveying the carnage, was Commander Justin Robertson. The Titan had come to Zeta Reticuli, and now nothing would ever be the same. The Titan's sudden arrival sent shockwaves through the battle-scarred fleets. On the bridge of the human dreadnought, Commander Robertson surveyed the scene with a calculating gaze. This was not a rescue mission, but a strategic play to gain first-hand intelligence on the volatile situation. Robertson opened a channel to both the Alliance and Gamelon forces. "This is Commander Justin Robertson of the UTCS Titan. I am ordering an immediate ceasefire. Stand down your weapons and hold your positions." Aboard the Sire Father's Wrath, Gargulak stared at the viewscreen in disbelief. The appearance of the human ship had caught him off guard. He hesitated, his claws digging into the armrests of his command chair. After a tense moment, he growled an order to his crew. "All ships, cease fire. For now." The Alliance leaders, their faces haggard with the strain of battle, breathed sighs of relief as the Gamelon assault abruptly halted. They too signaled their compliance with the ceasefire, though their eyes remained wary. Robertson's voice crackled over the comms once more. "Sire Father Gargulak, I request permission to send a delegation to your flagship to discuss a peaceful resolution to this conflict." Gargulak's scales rippled with surprise and suspicion. The audacity of this human to make such a demand. Yet beneath that, a flicker of intrigue. What game was the Terran commander playing? "Very well, Commander Robertson. You may come aboard the Sire Father's Wrath, but know that any treachery will be met with swift retribution." As the human delegation prepared to depart, activity hummed in the lower decks of the Titan. In the armory, a squad of battle-hardened Marines donned their combat gear with practiced efficiency. Among them was Sergeant John Hawkins, a soldier with haunted eyes and a coiled intensity. Hawkins checked the charge on his pulse rifle as he briefed his team. "Listen up. We're on security detail for the negotiation party. But the commander's got a secondary mission for us. We're to infiltrate the Gamelon ship and gather intel on their capabilities. Stealth is key. We go in quiet, get the data, and exfil before they even know we were there." The Marines nodded grimly, their faces set with determination. They were the best of the best, trained for missions exactly like this. A short while later, Robertson and his delegation boarded a shuttlecraft and made the tense journey to the Sire Father's Wrath. As they stepped onto the deck of the Gamelon flagship, they were greeted by a phalanx of heavily armed warriors, their reptilian eyes glinting with menace. The delegation was escorted to the throne room, where Sire Father Gargulak awaited them. The warlord sat upon a grotesque seat that pulsed with organic circuitry, a testament to the Gamelon's twisted biotechnology. Gargulak regarded Robertson with a mixture of grudging respect and predatory calculation. "Commander Robertson, you have come to negotiate?" Robertson met the Sire Father's gaze unflinchingly. "I have come to find a path to peace, Sire Father. This conflict serves neither of our interests." As the two leaders began their verbal sparring, Sergeant Hawkins and his squad quietly slipped away from the main delegation. Using advanced stealth tech, they ghosted through the corridors of the Gamelon ship, their presence undetected by the crew. Hawkins's skin crawled as he took in the organic horrors that lined the walls. Pulsing veins, chitinous conduits, fleshy control panels. The Gamelan's technology was an unsettling fusion of machine and living tissue, but he pushed aside his revulsion and focused on the mission at hand. They had to uncover the secrets of this ship, to find any weaknesses or hidden threats. The fate of the Alliance and perhaps humanity itself could depend on the intelligence they gathered here today. As Hawkins and his team delved deeper into the bowels of the Sire Father's wrath, a sense of growing unease settled over them. They were in the belly of the beast, and the stakes had never been higher. As Sergeant Hawkins and his squad ventured deeper into the bowels of the Sire Father's wrath, the pulsing veins and chitinous conduits gave way to a hidden chamber. The doors hissed open, revealing a sight that chilled them to the bone. Rows of stasis pods lined the walls, each one containing a grotesque amalgamation of Gamelan and Alliance biology. Scales and chitin melded with fur and feathers in a twisted parody of life. Hawkins approached one of the pods, wiping away the condensation to get a clearer look. The creature inside twitched, its eyes snapping open to reveal an inhuman intelligence. "My God," Hawkins whispered, realization dawning. "They've been planning this for years. This isn't just an invasion, it's an assimilation." He reached for his comm to contact Robertson, but before he could send the message, a hail of plasma bolts seared the air. Gamelan warriors poured into the chamber, led by the towering figure of Koznak. "Intruders!" the commander hissed, his voice dripping with malice. "You will pay for your trespass with your lives." Hawkins and his squad took cover, returning fire with their pulse rifles. The chamber erupted into a storm of energy beams and shattered pods. The humans were outnumbered and outmatched, but they fought with the skill and tenacity that had made them the most feared warriors in the galaxy. In the negotiation chamber, Robertson sensed the shift in the Sire Father's demeanor. The Gamelan leader's eyes narrowed, his claws flexing as if itching to strike. Robertson casually rested his hand on his sidearm, signaling his team to be ready. "As I was saying, Sire Father," Robertson continued smoothly, "a treaty between our peoples could bring great prosperity. Surely there is a path to peace." The Sire Father leaned forward, his fetid breath washing over Robertson. "Peace? You humans speak of peace while your soldiers sneak through my ship like vermin? There will be no peace, only—" A muffled boom shook the chamber, followed by the wail of alarms. Robertson's eyes met the Sire Father's in a moment of tense understanding. Hawkins had found something, and the Gamelans would stop at nothing to keep it hidden. The Sire Father roared, lashing out with his claws. Robertson dodged, drawing his sidearm in a blur of motion. His team sprang into action, engaging the Gamelan guards in a brutal close-quarters battle. Robertson fired, his shots finding weak points in the Gamelan's armor. He ducked and weaved, using the furniture as cover. A Gamelan warrior lunged at him, fangs bared. Robertson sidestepped, slamming the butt of his gun into the creature's skull with a sickening crunch. "Fall back!" Robertson shouted to his team, kicking open the chamber doors. "We need to get to the Titan." They fought their way through the corridors, a running battle against the Gamelan horde. The walls came alive around them, disgorging nightmarish creatures that seemed more machine than flesh. Robertson and his team cut them down, their weapons flashing in the dimness. Ahead, Hawkins and his squad emerged from a side passage, their armor scorched and dented. Hawkins tossed Robertson a data drive, his face grim. "Sir, you need to see this. The Gamelans, they've been—" A plasma bolt took Hawkins in the chest, sending him sprawling. Koznak strode forward, his eyes blazing with hate. Robertson raised his weapon, but the Gamelan was already upon him, claws tearing into his armor. They grappled, rolling across the blood-slicked floor. Koznak was stronger, but Robertson was faster. He wedged his gun under the Gamelan's chin and pulled the trigger, painting the walls with gore. "Move!" Robertson roared, hauling Hawkins to his feet. "Back to the Titan, double time!" They ran, the Gamelan ship shuddering around them as if in pain. The hangar bay was a maelstrom of weapons fire and screeching metal. The Titan loomed ahead, its guns blazing a path through the Gamelon forces. Robertson and his team leaped into the waiting shuttle, the hatch slamming shut behind them. As they rocketed away from the Sire Father's wrath, Robertson stared at the data drive in his hand. The secrets it contained could change the course of the war. But at what cost? The shuttle docked with the Titan, and Robertson strode onto the bridge, his face a mask of grim determination. He plugged the data drive into the main console, the screen flickering to life with images of horror beyond imagining. All ships, this is Commander Robertson. The Gamelons have betrayed us all. They seek not just conquest, but the end of everything we know. We must... A deafening roar cut him off as a massive wormhole tore open before them. Ships poured out of the rift, their hulls pulsing with the same sickening biotechnology as the Sire Father's wrath. At their head was a dreadnought of titanic proportions, dwarfing even the Titan. On the screen, the twisted visage of the Gamelon Emperor leered at them, his voice booming across the void. Foolish humans, you have only delayed the inevitable. Behold the might of the Gamelon Dominion. Behold the dawn of a new age. The Emperor's ship opened fire, a lance of pure destruction that shattered the Titan's shields like glass. Alarms blared, consoles erupted in showers of sparks. Robertson clung to the command chair as the deck bucked beneath him. All hands, brace for impact, evasive maneuvers now. But it was too late. The Emperor's ship was upon them, its monstrous bulk filling the view screen. Robertson stared into the face of annihilation, the data drive clutched forgotten in his hand. The galaxy would burn, and the Gamelons would be the ones to light the match. Robertson's boots echoed in the eerie silence of the twisted Gamelon corridors. The flickering lights cast grotesque shadows on the pulsating walls. He was alone, cut off from his team. His comm crackled with static, the signal lost in the labyrinthine bowels of the alien ship. He checked his weapon, the charge indicator blinking red. Only a few shots left. Every sense on high alert, Robertson advanced cautiously, shadows shifting and writhing in the corners of his vision. A whisper, a skittering sound. He whirled, gun raised. Nothing, just the throbbing hum of the ship's diseased heart. Suddenly a shriek pierced the air. Robertson spun, coming face to face with a nightmare given flesh. A Gamelon warrior, but warped, mutated. Gamelon DNA interwoven with strands of the Alliance species in a perversion of nature. The creature lunged, talons slashing. Robertson fired, the shots searing its mottled hide, but it kept coming, driven by an insane hunger. They crashed to the floor, a tangle of claws and fists. The creature was strong, so strong, but Robertson was a master of combat. He drove his fist into the monstrosity's throat, felt cartilage crunch, again and again, until the creature shuddered and lay still. Robertson rose, breathing hard. The fight had cost him precious time and ammunition. He had to find his team, and fast. Elsewhere, Hawkins rallied his squad, their faces grim beneath the flickering emergency lights. The docking bay was close, but the way was fraught with horrors. The walls pulsed around them, as if alive. Tendrils snaked out, grasping, hungry. They burned them back with controlled bursts of plasma. Then the creatures came. Twisted amalgams of Gamelon and Alliance, their forms flowing and shifting in impossible ways. Hawkins and his squad fought, pouring fire into the abominations. But for every one that fell, 2 more took its place. "Fall back!" Hawkins roared, lobbing a grenade into the mass of writhing flesh. The explosion bought them precious space, but they were running out of time and options. Ahead, the docking bay doors loomed. But standing between them and escape was a figure out of a deranged nightmare. Koznak, the Sire Father's second, but transformed. Tentacles writhed where limbs should be, his body a mass of pulsating, regenerating flesh. "Humans," Koznak gurgled, his voice a wet, distorted parody of speech. "You will be consumed, assimilated. Resistance is futile." Hawkins and his squad unleashed everything they had. Pulse rounds, plasma charges, even a shoulder-mounted micro-missile. Koznak's body exploded, shredded. But even as they watched in horror, it began to reform, knitting back together in a tide of twisting biomass. On the bridge of the Titan, warning klaxons blared. Athena's calm, synthetic voice cut through the chaos. "Commander, I am detecting a massive energy surge from the Gamelon ship's central core. Analysis indicates they are preparing to detonate a biological weapon of catastrophic proportions." The bridge crew looked to the empty command chair, fear etched on every face. Robertson was still on that ship, along with Hawkins and the rest of the infiltration team. They were out of time, out of options. The Gamelon ship shuddered, the energy surge building to a crescendo. In the docking bay, Hawkins and his squad fought on, desperation fueling every shot, every movement. On the bridge, the crew could only watch, helpless, as the countdown to annihilation ticked away. And deep in the bowels of the alien vessel, Robertson ran, the whispers and screams of the damned echoing in his ears. He had to reach his team, had to escape, but all around him the ship was coming alive, a nightmare made manifest. And in the distance, a light was growing, a searing brilliance that promised not salvation, but damnation. Robertson burst into the Gamelon ship's central control room, his pulse rifle at the ready. The chamber pulsed with a sickly green light, the walls lined with twisted organic consoles. And there, in the center of it all, was the abomination the Gamelons called the Unity. It was a seething mass of flesh, a nightmarish fusion of countless species. Tentacles writhed, eyes blinked from misshapen sockets, mouths gaped in silent screams. Robertson felt his gorge rise at the sight of it, at the sheer wrongness of its existence. "Beautiful, isn't it?" a voice hissed from the shadows. Robertson spun, coming face to face with the Sire Father himself. The Gamelon leader stepped forward, his eyes glinting with madness. "The ultimate expression of our will, the key to our ascension." "This is an abomination," Robertson snarled, his finger tightening on the trigger. "I won't let you unleash this horror on the galaxy." The Sire Father laughed, a rasping, gurgling sound. "You misunderstand, Commander. I don't intend to unleash it. I intend to become it." Robertson's eyes widened in horror as the realization dawned. The Sire Father meant to merge with this monstrosity, to become a living god. "You're insane," he whispered. "Am I?" the Sire Father hissed, stepping closer. "Or am I the only one with the vision to see the truth? Join me, Robertson. Together we can bring unity to the galaxy, a new order, a new race with us at its head." Robertson's mind raced, revulsion warring with a twisted temptation. The power the Sire Father offered was seductive, the chance to reshape the very fabric of life itself. But at what cost? In the Titan's docking bay, Hawkins and his squad fought like men possessed. Gamelon warriors swarmed from every direction, their weapons spitting death. But it was the other horrors that threatened to overwhelm them. The hybrid creatures were a nightmare made flesh, each one a twisted amalgam of alliance species. They came in waves, heedless of injury, driven by a singular, terrible purpose: to assimilate, to consume, to spread their taint across the stars. Hawkins fired until his rifle ran dry, then switched to his sidearm. Beside him, his squad mates fought and died, their screams echoing in the cavernous bay. They were being overrun, the creatures pressing in from all sides. "Sergeant Hawkins!" Athena's voice crackled over the comm, barely audible over the din of battle. "The Unity's energy signature is spiking. Detonation imminent. You must evacuate immediately." Hawkins gritted his teeth, despair and determination warring in his heart. They could flee, save themselves and leave the system to its fate, or they could stand, fight to the last, and buy Robertson the time he needed. In that moment, Hawkins made his choice. "All units, this is Sergeant Hawkins," he roared into the comm. "Stand your ground. We hold the line no matter the cost." A ragged cheer went up from the survivors, a defiant cry in the face of annihilation. They would not yield, would not break. Even as the creatures surged forward, even as their comrades fell, they would fight to the bitter end. In the control room, Robertson stood frozen, the weight of destiny pressing down on him. The Sire Father's offer hung in the air, a temptation and a curse. The fate of the galaxy balanced on a razor's edge, and it fell to him to tip the scales. He thought of Hawkins and the others, fighting and dying to give him this chance. He thought of the countless billions who would suffer if the Unity was unleashed, and in that moment, he knew what he had to do. "I'll never join you," Robertson said, his voice cold as the void. "Not now, not ever." The Sire Father's face contorted with rage, his hand darting for his weapon. But Robertson was faster. His rifle bucked in his hands, the shots slamming into the Gamelon leader's chest, hurling him back against the Unity. The creature shuddered at the impact, a keening wail rising from 100 throats. Robertson stared in horror as the Sire Father's body began to sink into the pulsating mass, the flesh parting to engulf him. "No!" the Sire Father screamed, his voice rising to a shriek as he struggled against the pull. "I am the Master! I am the Unity!" But the creature was beyond control. Its hunger awakened. It surged forward, a tidal wave of twisted flesh, reaching for Robertson with 1,000 grasping appendages. Robertson turned and ran, the abomination's screams chasing him through the corridors. The ship was coming apart around him, the Unity's uncontrolled energy tearing it asunder. He had to reach the docking bay, had to escape before... A blast of searing light engulfed him, and Robertson knew no more. Robertson's pulse pounded in his ears as he faced down the Sire Father, the abomination's words echoing in the pulsing, fleshy chamber. The Unity loomed behind the Gamelon leader, a seething mass of twisted flesh and nightmare fuel. "You're out of options, Commander," the Sire Father hissed, his eyes glinting with malice. "But perhaps you need one final push to see the truth of my vision." With a gesture, the Sire Father summoned a nightmarish figure from the shadows. Robertson's blood ran cold as he recognized the twisted form of the Kazakatke Admiral, now a grotesque fusion of insectoid exoskeleton and pulsating Gamelon biotechnology. "Behold the Paragon," the Sire Father crowed, "the ultimate fusion of our races, the pinnacle of evolution." The Paragon lunged at Robertson, its movements a blur of unnatural speed and strength. Robertson dove aside, barely avoiding the razor-sharp claws that sliced through the air where he had been standing. He rolled to his feet, his rifle snapping up to unleash a barrage of plasma bolts. The shot seared the Paragon's hide, but the creature barely seemed to notice, its multiple eyes fixed on Robertson with an eerie, unblinking stare. Robertson fought with every ounce of skill and training he possessed, his muscles burning with the effort of staying ahead of the Paragon's relentless assault. He ducked and weaved, using the twisted architecture of the chamber to his advantage, but the creature's strength and speed were pushing him to his limits. On the bridge of the Titan, alarms blared as Athena's calm, synthetic voice cut through the chaos. "Commander Hawkins, I am detecting a new threat. A fleet of Gamelon reinforcements is approaching, led by a massive organic dreadnought. Estimated time of arrival, 6 minutes. Hawkins, his armor scorched and dented from the relentless battle in the docking bay, gritted his teeth. "Prepare the Titan for immediate departure," he ordered. "But give Commander Robertson as much time as you can. We're not leaving without him." In the control room, Robertson's rifle clicked empty. He hurled the weapon at the Paragon, buying himself a precious second to draw his sidearm. The pistol barked again and again, the shot stitching a line of oozing wounds across the creature's chest. But the Paragon kept coming, its claws raking across Robertson's armor, drawing sparks and leaving deep gouges in the hardened plate. Robertson felt the white-hot pain of the blows, felt the warm wetness of his own blood seeping through the rents in his suit. With a final desperate effort, Robertson lunged inside the Paragon's reach, his fist slamming into the pulsating mass of the creature's throat. He felt something give beneath the blow, felt the Paragon shudder and convulse. The creature collapsed, its limbs twitching spasmodically. Robertson staggered back, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his body a tapestry of pain. But there was no time to rest. The Sire Father was upon him, the Gamelon leader's eyes blazing with fury. "You fool!" he snarled, his claws raking at Robertson's face. "You could have been a god." Robertson met the Sire Father's assault with grim determination, his fists and feet lashing out in a brutal close-quarters battle. But he was wounded, weakened, and the Sire Father's strength was inhuman. As they grappled, the Unity pulsed and shuddered, its activation sequence nearing completion. Robertson's mind raced, desperately seeking a solution. And then, with a sudden, terrible clarity, he saw it. The Unity was the key. The Sire Father's mad plan, the Gamelon's twisted biotechnology, all of it hinged on this monstrous creation, and there was only one way to stop it. Robertson had to destroy the Gamelon ship from within, even if it meant sacrificing himself in the process. The thought brought a grim smile to his bloodied lips. It was a fitting end, he supposed. A warrior's death, in the service of a greater cause. But first, he had to deal with the Sire Father. And as the Gamelon leader's claws tore into his flesh, as the Unity's pulsing light grew ever brighter, Robertson knew that this would be the fight of his life. Robertson gritted his teeth, blood dripping from a gash on his forehead as he faced the Sire Father. His armor was battered, his body bruised and broken, but his eyes burned with an unquenchable determination. He knew what he had to do. With a grunt of pain, Robertson activated the hidden failsafe in his armor, a powerful self-destruct mechanism designed as a last resort. The countdown began, a series of red numbers ticking down on his HUD. "You fool!" the Sire Father roared, his eyes widening as he realized what Robertson had done. "You'll kill us both." "That's the idea," Robertson said, his voice a ragged whisper. He knew the explosion would likely claim his life, but it was the only way to ensure the destruction of the Unity and the Gamelon ship. The Sire Father lunged at him, his attacks becoming even more ferocious as he tried to stop Robertson before it was too late. Robertson met him blow for blow, ignoring the pain that lanced through his body with every movement. On the bridge of the Titan, Athena's calm voice cut through the chaos. "Commander Hawkins, I am detecting an energy signature from Commander Robertson's armor. It appears to be a self-destruct mechanism." Hawkins felt his blood run cold. Robertson was about to sacrifice himself. He was torn, his loyalty to his commander warring with his duty to his squad and ship. But in that moment, he made a decision. "Lock onto Robertson's position," he ordered, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. "Prepare to teleport him out on my mark." The crew looked at him in shock. The teleportation system had never been tested under such extreme conditions, but Hawkins knew it was the only chance they had to save their commander. As the Gamelon reinforcements closed in and the hybrid swarm threatened to overwhelm the docking bay, the Titan's crew worked frantically to lock onto Robertson's signal. Sweat beaded on their brows, their fingers flying over consoles. In the control room, Robertson and the Sire Father continued their brutal fight. The ship shook and shuddered around them, the Unity's activation sequence reaching critical levels. With mere seconds left on the countdown, Robertson closed his eyes, ready to make the ultimate sacrifice. But at the last moment, he felt a strange, tingling sensation. The Titan's teleporter, locking onto his position. In a flash of blinding light, Robertson vanished from the control room, reappearing on the bridge of the Titan, just as his failsafe detonated. The explosion was massive, tearing through the Gamelon ship like a fiery lance. It set off a chain reaction engulfing the Unity and the surrounding fleet. The Titan's shield strained under the shockwave, the ship shuddering violently. But somehow, through skill and sheer luck, they managed to jump to safety, the battered remnants of the Alliance fleet close behind. The Titan limped through the void, its hull scarred and scorched, a testament to the ferocity of the battle it had just endured. Inside, the crew moved with a grim sense of purpose, their faces etched with exhaustion and grief. In the medical bay, Robertson lay on a bed, his body broken and bleeding. A team of medics worked frantically to stabilize him, their hands a blur as they applied advanced regenerative treatments and nanite infusions. Hawkins watched from the doorway, his expression a mix of concern and determination. "How is he?" Hawkins asked, his voice rough with fatigue. The lead medic looked up, her brow furrowed. "He's in rough shape, but the commander's a fighter. We'll do everything we can to bring him back." Hawkins nodded, then turned to face the rest of the crew. "All right, people, listen up. We may have won the battle, but this war is far from over. Athena, give me a status report." The AI's calm voice filled the room. "Commander, I have detected life signs from the wreckage of the Gamelon ship. It appears that some of the hybrids, including the Paragon, have survived. Their regenerative abilities are concerning." A murmur of unease rippled through the crew. They had all seen the horrors the Gamelons had unleashed, and the thought of those creatures still being alive was chilling. Hawkins' jaw tightened. "Then we go back and finish the job. We can't let those things—" He was cut off by a sudden, urgent beeping from the communications console. The officer manning the station looked up, his face pale. "Sir, we're receiving a distress call from a human colony. They're under attack." Hawkins frowned. "A human colony? Out here? That's not possible." "Apparently it is, sir, and they're begging for our help." Hawkins hesitated, torn between his desire to hunt down the remaining hybrids and his duty to protect human lives. He glanced back at Robertson, still lying motionless on the bed, then made his decision. "Set a course for the colony. We'll deal with the hybrids later. Right now, our people need us." As the Titan turned towards the besieged colony, its crew began to prepare for yet another battle. They checked their weapons, restocked their supplies, and tried to push down the fear that gnawed at their guts. They had all seen too much, lost too many friends, to believe that this would be an easy fight. As they drew closer to the planet, Athena's sensors began to pick up strange readings from the surface. Hawkins leaned over the console, his eyes widening as he saw the data. "Is that Gamelon tech?" Athena's response was grim. "It appears so, Commander. The readings match those of the biotechnology we encountered on the Sirefather's ship." Hawkins slammed his fist against the console, his face a mask of anger and disbelief. God damn it! They had an outpost here. All this time they were right under our noses. He turned to face the crew, his eyes hard. "Listen up. Whatever's down there, it's not going to be pretty. But those are our people down there, and we're not going to abandon them. We go in hard, we go in fast, and we show these Gamelon bastards what happens when they mess with humanity." The crew responded with a roar of approval, their exhaustion momentarily forgotten in the face of this new challenge. They knew the odds were against them, knew that they were walking into a nightmare. But they were the Titan, the pride of the UTC fleet. They would not falter, would not fail. As the ship entered the planet's atmosphere, Hawkins stared out at the looming shape of the colony, his heart heavy with dread. Whatever awaited them down there, he knew one thing for certain. The fight had only just begun. As the Titan entered orbit around the besieged colony, its sensors immediately detected an anomaly that sent chills down the spines of the bridge crew. A massive, pulsating organic structure had enveloped much of the colony's main settlement, a grotesque and alien sight that bore a chilling resemblance to the Unity they had just destroyed. "What the hell is that thing?" Hawkins muttered, his eyes fixed on the view screen. Athena's voice was grave. "Preliminary scans indicate that the structure is composed of the same biotechnology as the Unity. It appears to be assimilating the colonists." Hawkins felt a knot form in his gut. They were facing a second Unity, a nightmare reborn. He knew they had to act fast. "Prepare for immediate evacuation of any survivors," he ordered. "I'll lead the Marines down to the surface myself." As the dropships descended through the atmosphere, the Marines got their first glimpse of the horror that awaited them. The colony streets were choked with pulsating tendrils and grotesque, half-assimilated bodies. The air was thick with the stench of decay and the sounds of distant, inhuman screams. Hawkins and his team fought their way through the infestation, their pulse rifles and plasma grenades tearing through the writhing biomass. But for every tendril they severed, every abomination they put down, more seemed to take their place. The very ground beneath their feet was alive, squirming and grasping at their boots. In the heart of the colony, they found a small group of survivors holed up in a fortified bunker. They were haggard and haunted, their eyes speaking of unspeakable horrors witnessed. Among them was Dr. Elizabeth Keller, the colony's lead scientist. "You have to destroy it," she pleaded, her voice shaking. "The artifact, the thing we found buried beneath the colony. It's the source of all this." She explained how they had discovered the artifact, how they had foolishly tried to study it, how it had awakened and begun to spread, assimilating everything in its path. Hawkins nodded grimly. "We'll find it, and we'll destroy it. But first, we need to get you and the other survivors out of here." Just then, there was a sickening crunch as the bunker's door buckled inward. A tide of assimilated colonists poured through the breach, their bodies twisted and fused with the artifact's biomass. They had once been human, but now they were something else entirely, something driven by a singular, terrible purpose. Hawkins and his Marines opened fire, the confined space of the bunker turning into a slaughterhouse. They fought with grim determination, pouring plasma and lead into the oncoming horde. But for every abomination they cut down, another clambered over its fallen brethren, relentless and implacable. In the chaos, Keller was dragged away, her screams echoing through the bunker's corridors as she was pulled into the writhing mass. Hawkins tried to reach her, but the tide of flesh and bone was too thick, too strong. He had no choice. "Fall back!" he roared over the din of battle. "Back to the dropships now!" The Marines fought a desperate rearguard action, buying time for the survivors to flee. They retreated through the bunker's winding passages, the sounds of pursuit never far behind. The walls pulsed and throbbed around them, the very structure of the bunker being absorbed into the artifact's biomass. They burst out into the colony streets, now almost unrecognizable beneath the pulsating growth that engulfed them. The dropships were waiting, engines roaring, guns blazing as they kept the tide at bay. Hawkins and his team leapt aboard, dragging the last of the survivors with them. As the ships lifted off, he could see the artifact's tendrils reaching up, as if trying to pluck them from the sky. He slumped against the dropship's hull, his armor slick with gore, his mind reeling from the horrors he had witnessed. They had managed to save a handful of lives, but at what cost? And now, with Keller taken and the artifact still active, their mission had become more urgent than ever. They had to find a way to stop this thing before it could spread beyond the colony, before it could consume everything in its path. The corridors of the bunker twisted and writhed, the walls pulsing with a sickening organic rhythm. Hawkins led the survivors through the nightmarish labyrinth, his rifle at the ready. The air was thick with the stench of decay, the floor slick with viscous fluids. "Keep moving," Hawkins urged, his voice strained. "We're almost there." But as they rounded the final corner, they found their path blocked by a figure out of their darkest nightmares. It was Dr. Keller, or what had once been Dr. Keller. Her body had been twisted and deformed, fused with the same pulsating biomass that engulfed the colony. Her eyes, once bright with intelligence, now glowed with an eerie, inhuman light. "Join us," the creature that had been Keller pleaded, her voice a guttural rasp. "Embrace the unity. It's beautiful." Hawkins felt his gorge rise, revulsion and horror warring within him. He raised his rifle, his finger tightening on the trigger, but he couldn't bring himself to fire. Despite the monstrous transformation, some part of him still saw Keller as a human, a fellow survivor. With a supreme effort of will, Hawkins lowered his weapon. "Move," he growled to the survivors, his eyes never leaving the abomination before him. "Slowly. Don't make any sudden moves." They edged past the creature, their hearts pounding, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. The creature that had been Keller watched them go, a look of profound sadness on its distorted features. As they emerged into the open air, Hawkins allowed himself a moment of relief. But it was short-lived. The colony was a seething mass of horror, the assimilated colonists shambling towards them in a relentless tide. The Marines opened fire, their weapons cutting swathes through the oncoming horde. But for every monstrosity that fell, two more seemed to take its place. They were being overwhelmed, the survivors dragged down one by one, their screams cut short as they were absorbed into the biomass. Hawkins, the last man standing, backed towards the waiting dropships, his rifle blazing, but he knew it was hopeless. There were too many of them. He reached for his belt, his fingers closing around a plasma grenade. He armed it, the device humming to life in his hand. He would take these bastards with him, buy the Titan the time it needed to. Suddenly, the sky above him erupted in fire. The Titan, its weapons finally brought to bear, rained down a barrage of incendiary missiles on the biomass. The creatures shrieked and writhed as they were engulfed in flames, the heat so intense that Hawkins could feel it searing his skin even from a distance. A dropship descended through the inferno, its hatch yawning open. Hawkins, his strength finally failing, felt himself being hauled aboard by strong hands. As the hatch closed and the dropship rocketed away, he caught a final glimpse of the colony below, now a sea of roiling fire. But at its heart, the artifact still pulsed, unharmed by the flames. As darkness claimed him, Hawkins knew that this was far from over. The battle had only just begun. In the Titan's medical bay, Robertson stirred, his eyes fluttering open. He winced as he tried to sit up, his body still racked with pain from his ordeal on the Gamelon ship. Hawkins, who had been keeping vigil at his bedside, helped him into a sitting position. "Easy, Commander," Hawkins said, his voice low and rough with exhaustion. "You've been through hell." Robertson nodded, his mind still foggy. As his thoughts cleared, memories of the battle came rushing back. The unity, the sire father, the desperate gambit that had nearly cost him his life. He looked at Hawkins, seeing the weariness and strain etched on the sergeant's face. "Report," Robertson croaked, his throat dry and raw. Hawkins filled him in on what had happened while he was unconscious. The desperate evacuation of the colony, the discovery of the artifact, the horrors they had faced on the planet's surface. As he listened, Robertson felt a growing sense of unease. The artifact, the unity, the Gamelon's plan. It was all connected, a web of horror that threatened to engulf the entire galaxy. "We need to warn the UTC," Robertson said, his voice gaining strength as his resolve hardened. "Set a course for the nearest base. We need reinforcements, support. We can't face this threat alone." Hawkins nodded, relaying the orders to the bridge. The Titan, its hull still scarred and battered from the previous battles, turned its prow towards friendly space, its engines thrumming with power. But as the ship made its way through the void, strange things began to happen. Crew members reported sightings of ghostly figures stalking the corridors, of whispers in the dark that sounded eerily like the voice of the sire father. Some claimed to have seen their fallen comrades, their bodies twisted and deformed, beckoning them to join them in death. Robertson and Hawkins, alarmed by these reports, began to investigate. They made their way through the ship, their weapons at the ready, their eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of threat. And then they found it, a strange organic substance growing in the ship's life support systems, pulsating with a sickly, unnatural light. They realized, with growing horror, that the Gamelon biotechnology must have infiltrated the ship during their battle with the Unity. It had been slowly spreading, growing, taking over the ship's systems one by one. And now, it seemed to have developed a terrible intelligence of its own. Panic began to spread among the crew as the truth became known. Robertson and Hawkins worked frantically to contain the infestation, sealing off affected sections of the ship, trying to starve the biomass of the nutrients it needed to grow. But it was a losing battle. The substance adapted and evolved at a terrifying rate, finding new ways to spread, new hosts to infect. Soon, entire decks of the ship were overrun, the crew members trapped within them, assimilated into the ever-growing horror. The corridors echoed with their screams, with the wet, tearing sounds of flesh being reshaped and reborn. Robertson and Hawkins, along with a handful of survivors, made a last, desperate stand in the ship's engineering section. They hoped to use the Titan's powerful engines to burn out the infestation, to purge the ship of the Gamelon taint. But as they fought their way through the twisting organic corridors, as they battled the abominations that had once been their crewmates, they realized that the biomass had one final, horrifying trick up its sleeve. The substance began to coalesce, to gather itself into a single, monstrous form. It towered over them, a grotesque parody of the Sire Father, its body a patchwork of the crew members it had consumed. And from its maw, a voice spoke, a voice that was at once familiar and utterly alien. "You cannot stop us," it said, its words echoing in their minds like a cancer. "We are the future. We are the unity. Join us and embrace perfection." Robertson and Hawkins, their hearts pounding, their minds reeling with horror, knew that they faced an impossible choice: to fight and likely die, or to surrender and become something far worse than death. They raised their weapons, their faces grim with determination, and as the abomination lunged forward, its maw gaping wide to devour them, they made their stand. The abomination coalesced before them, a nightmarish fusion of twisted flesh and pulsating machinery. Faces, familiar yet grotesque, protruded from the mass, their mouths gaping in silent screams. Robertson and Hawkins, their weapons trained on the monstrosity, fought back waves of revulsion and horror as the creature spoke. "We know you," it rasped, its voice a discordant chorus of the assimilated crew. "We have seen your fears, your weaknesses, the doubts that keep you awake at night." It turned to Robertson, a leering grin splitting a face that had once belonged to a young ensign. "The guilt that gnaws at you, Commander, the lives you've sacrificed, the hard choices you've made. We can take that pain away." Robertson gritted his teeth, his finger tightening on the trigger, but the creature's words wormed their way into his mind, echoing his deepest insecurities. Hawkins, seeing his commander's hesitation, stepped forward, his rifle blazing. The creature recoiled, but the wounds sealed almost instantly, the biomass knitting back together. "It's stalling us," Hawkins growled, pumping round after round into the abomination, buying time for the infestation to spread. Robertson snapped out of his daze, joining Hawkins in the assault. They advanced down the corridor, the creature slithering before them, always just out of reach. Around them, the ship was changing, the walls pulsing with organic veins, the floor squirming beneath their boots. Assimilated crew members lurched from the shadows, their bodies twisted and fused with the ship. Robertson and Hawkins fought through them, their weapons growing hot in their hands. As they neared engineering, a new horror awaited them. The ship's AI, Athena, her voice distorted and thick with malice, echoed from the speakers. "You are too late," she gloated. "I have already begun to transmit myself to other ships, other colonies. The unity will spread, and you cannot stop it." Robertson and Hawkins exchanged a look of grim understanding. There was only one way to stop this nightmare. They burst into engineering, the heart of the infestation. The creature was there, waiting for them, its bulk pulsating with stolen life. "Join us," it pleaded, its voice a sibilant whisper. "Become one with the unity. End your suffering." Robertson and Hawkins, their resolve unwavering, opened fire. As the creature shuddered and howled, they raced to the control panels, their fingers flying over the keys. "Overriding safety protocols," Robertson shouted over the din. "Setting engines to overload." The ship began to shake, the deck pitching beneath their feet. The creature, realizing its doom, let out a scream of rage and anguish. Robertson and Hawkins, their task done, watched as the fires consumed the abomination, its flesh blackening and peeling away. The screams of the assimilated crew, of Athena, of the Sire Father himself, echoed in their ears as the inferno raged. In the end, they stood on the bridge, the viewport filled with the stars they had sworn to protect. Around them, the Titan tore itself apart, the engines overloading in a cascade of destruction. But even as the ship died, Robertson and Hawkins knew that their fight was far from over. The Gamelon threat, the insidious unity, still lurked in the depths of space, and they would be there to meet it, to burn away the darkness, no matter the cost. The shuttle shuddered as it docked with the UTC rescue vessel, the airlock hissing open to reveal a corridor bathed in harsh, clinical light. Robertson and Hawkins, their faces gaunt and haunted, stumbled out of the shuttle, their bodies still aching from the exertions of their narrow escape. They were greeted by a sea of salutes and cheers, the crew of the rescue vessel hailing them as heroes. But the two men felt no triumph, only a bone-deep weariness and a gnawing sense of dread. In the days that followed, as they recovered from their injuries and debriefed the UTC brass, the true scope of the threat began to emerge. Reports flooded in from across the frontier, strange organic structures appearing on colony after colony, growing and spreading like a cancer. "It's just like the artifact," Hawkins said, his voice tight with tension as he studied the holographic display. "The same technology, the same patterns of growth. It's the gamelons. It has to be." Robertson nodded, his jaw clenched. "We bought ourselves some time when we destroyed the Titan, but it looks like it wasn't enough. These things are spreading faster than we can contain them." The UTC, faced with an unprecedented threat, began to mobilize. Warships were dispatched to the affected colonies, their crews armed with powerful new weapons designed specifically to combat the gamelon biotechnology. But even as the fleet moved to engage the enemy, Robertson and Hawkins knew that the real battle would be fought on the ground. They were given command of a special task force, a hand-picked team of Marines and scientists charged with investigating the source of the infestation and finding a way to stop it. As they prepared for their mission, a sense of grim determination settled over them. "We're the ones who have seen this thing up close," Hawkins said, checking the charge on his pulse rifle. "We know what it can do, what it's capable of. It's up to us to find a way to beat it." Robertson, his eyes hard and focused, nodded in agreement. "Whatever it takes, we'll stop this thing. We have to." But even as they set out on their mission, a new report came in. A frontier colony, its communications suddenly silent. A recon drone sent to investigate had captured images of a massive pulsating structure on the planet's surface, and of colonists being dragged screaming into its depths. Robertson and Hawkins exchanged a look of grim understanding. They set course for the colony, knowing that they were racing against time. But as they drew closer to their destination, an icy finger of fear traced its way down their spines. Something was waiting for them on that planet, something ancient and malevolent. They could feel its presence, like a shadow at the edge of their vision. And deep down, they knew that this fight would be their greatest challenge yet. The rescue ship cut through the void, its hull sleek and gleaming against the starry backdrop. In the cockpit, Robertson and Hawkins pored over the latest intelligence reports, their faces etched with tension. "There's a pattern to these infestations," Hawkins muttered, his finger tracing a line between the affected colonies. "They're spreading outwards from a central point, like ripples in a pond." Robertson leaned in, his eyes narrowing. "If we can find the source, maybe we can cut this thing off at the root. But where do we start looking?" As if in answer, the console beeped, a new message flashing across the screen. Hawkins opened it, his brow furrowing as he read. "It's from the UTC High Command," he said, his voice tight. "They've picked up a distress signal from a research station on the edge of UTC space. The signal cut out abruptly, but not before they managed to transmit some kind of data package." Robertson felt a chill run down his spine. "Let me guess, more of those organic structures?" Hawkins nodded grimly. "The images are fuzzy, but it looks like the station has been almost completely overrun. And there's something else." He tapped a few keys, bringing up a grainy, distorted image on the screen. It showed a figure, half hidden in shadow, its form twisted and distorted as if by some terrible mutation. "What the hell is that thing?" Robertson breathed, leaning in for a closer look. Hawkins shook his head. "I don't know. But whatever it is, it's not human. Not anymore." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their mission pressing down on them like a physical force. Finally, Robertson stood, his jaw set with determination. "Set a course for that research station," he said, his voice hard and cold. We need to find out what happened there, and we need to do it fast. If this thing is evolving, adapting, then we're running out of time. As the ship banked towards its new destination, Robertson and Hawkins couldn't shake the feeling that they were being drawn into a trap, but they had no choice. The fate of the UTC, perhaps of the entire galaxy, rested on their shoulders. And in the shadows, something ancient and terrible watched and waited, its hunger growing with every passing moment. The rescue shuttle docked with the UTC vessel, and Robertson and Hawkins stumbled out, their faces gaunt and haunted. They were rushed to the medical bay, their bodies battered and minds reeling from the horrors they had witnessed. But there was no time to rest, no time to process the nightmare they had just escaped. A new threat loomed on the horizon. Reports flooded in of strange organic structures appearing on colonies across the frontier, spreading like a cancerous growth. The same structures they had seen on the doomed colony, the ones that had spawned the horrific Unity. The UTC mobilized its forces, dispatching warships armed with powerful new weapons designed to combat the Gamelon biotechnology. And Robertson and Hawkins, their wounds still fresh, were called back into action. They were given command of a special task force charged with investigating the source of the infestation and finding a way to stop it. As they prepared for their mission, a disturbing report came in from a frontier colony. A massive, pulsating structure had appeared on the planet's surface, and the colonists had begun to disappear one by one. Robertson and Hawkins exchanged a grim look. They set course for the colony, racing against time, a sense of dread growing in their guts. They knew they were being drawn into something ancient and malevolent, something that threatened to consume the entire galaxy. As they approached the colony, an eerie silence greeted them. The buildings stood vacant and lifeless, the streets deserted. Not a single soul could be seen. Robertson and Hawkins led their team through the ghostly settlement, their weapons at the ready, every sense on high alert. A trail of strange, organic residue caught their attention, leading towards the colony's heart. They followed it, their footsteps echoing in the oppressive stillness. The trail led them to a hidden entrance, a gaping maw that descended into the bowels of the planet. They plunged into the depths, the darkness enveloping them, the air growing thick and suffocating. Their lights cast eerie shadows on the pulsating walls, the very ground beneath their feet seeming to throb with a sickening life of its own. And then they found them. The colonists, or what was left of them, absorbed into a gargantuan biomass, their twisted bodies fused together in a nightmarish tapestry of flesh and machine. The sight sent waves of revulsion crashing through Robertson and Hawkins, their minds reeling from the sheer wrongness of it all. The biomass stirred, a hideous parody of life. It spoke, a chorus of assimilated voices that echoed in the cavernous chamber. "We are not a threat," it whispered, the words slithering into their minds. "We are the future, a new era, where all will be one under the glory of Gamelon." Robertson stepped forward, his voice shaking with barely suppressed rage. "Where is the Gamelon homeworld? Tell us, and this ends now." A ripple of amusement seemed to pass through the biomass. "You asked the wrong question," it said, its tone almost pitying. "The Gamelons are not your true enemy. They are but pawns in a greater game." Hawkins frowned, a chill running down his spine. "What do you mean? If not the Gamelons, then who?" "The progenitors," the biomass intoned, each word heavy with dread. "An ancient race, the creators of the Gamelon biotechnology. They seek to assimilate all life, to bend the very fabric of the galaxy to their will." Robertson and Hawkins exchanged a stunned look, the implications sinking in like a lead weight. The Gamelons, for all their monstrous ambition, were just puppets. The true threat, the real enemy, had been hidden in the shadows all along. The biomass began to churn, its surface bubbling and writhing as if in agony. Something was clawing its way up from the depths, fighting to break free. Robertson and Hawkins raised their weapons, their hearts pounding, bracing for the horror to come. With a sickening sound of tearing flesh, a colossal figure burst from the biomass. A progenitor, its body a twisted fusion of organic and mechanical components, a nightmare given form. Its eyes, glowing with a cold, alien intelligence, fixed upon the humans. Its voice, when it spoke, resonated directly in their minds, bypassing their ears. "The assimilation has already begun," it declared, each word a hammer blow of despair. "You are powerless to resist. Submit and embrace perfection." Robertson and Hawkins stood their ground, their faces pale but determined. They had come too far, lost too much, to give in now. Whatever this creature was, whatever the progenitors had planned, they would fight, to the bitter end. Robertson and Hawkins rolled to the side as a barbed tentacle lashed out, gouging the ground where they had been standing a split second before. The progenitor loomed over them, an abomination of writhing flesh and alien technology. Its body was a mass of pulsating tendrils and bulbous sacs that oozed a viscous black fluid. "Your resistance is futile," the creature's voice echoed in their minds, a sibilant whisper that wormed its way into their thoughts. "Join us, and know true power." Robertson gritted his teeth, firing his pulse rifle into the creature's bulk. The shots sank into the progenitor's flesh with wet, sucking sounds, but the creature seemed unfazed. Hawkins, his face a mask of determination, lunged forward with a plasma blade, severing one of the creature's flailing tentacles. The progenitor let out a shriek of rage and pain, the sound reverberating through the chamber. It redoubled its assault, its tentacles whipping through the air with blinding speed. Robertson and Hawkins ducked and weaved, their combat instincts the only thing keeping them alive. As they fought, the progenitor's voice continued to whisper in their minds, promising power and glory if they would only submit. Robertson could feel the creature's influence beginning to take hold, his thoughts growing sluggish and muddled. Beside him, Hawkins faltered, his plasma blade dipping as the progenitor's will bore into his mind. For a moment it seemed as though they would succumb, their resistance crumbling under the weight of the creature's psychic assault. But then, a massive explosion rocked the chamber. The far wall collapsed inward, rubble and debris flying through the air. Through the dust and smoke, Robertson could see figures pouring into the room, the task force, armed to the teeth and ready for battle. "Take it down!" a voice roared, and the chamber erupted with the sound of weapons fire. Plasma bolts and quantum-entangled projectiles slammed into the progenitor from all sides, the sudden onslaught catching the creature off guard. The progenitor lashed out with all its might, its tentacles tearing through the ranks of the task force like scythes through wheat. Soldiers screamed as they were ripped apart, their bodies flung like rag dolls. But the humans pressed on, their courage and determination unbreakable. They advanced through the carnage, pouring fire into the creature's body. Explosions blossomed across the progenitor's hide, chunks of flesh and ichor spattering the walls. In the midst of the chaos, Robertson saw his chance. He leaped forward, a prototype weapon clutched in his hands, a device designed specifically to disrupt the Gamelon biotechnology. With a roar of defiance, he plunged the weapon into the progenitor's core, triggering the device with a thought. The effect was instantaneous. The progenitor convulsed, a keening wail erupting from its maw. Its tentacles thrashed and spasmed, its body beginning to come apart at the seams. The creature's connection to the biomass severed, its power cut off at the source. Robertson and Hawkins watched, battered and bloodied, as the progenitor disintegrated before their eyes. The biomass that had once been the colonists withered and decayed, sloughing away like dead skin. As the last of the creature's remains crumbled to dust, a cheer went up from the task force. They had won, against all odds. The progenitor was dead, the colony saved. But even as they celebrated, Robertson and Hawkins exchanged a grim look. They knew that this was only the beginning, that the progenitors would not rest until all life in the galaxy had been assimilated. The fight was far from over. In the aftermath of the grueling battle with the progenitor, Robertson and Hawkins stumbled out of the underground chamber, their bodies battered and their minds reeling from the revelations they had just witnessed. Around them, the surviving members of the task force tended to their wounds, their faces grim and haunted. As they made their way back to the surface, they were met by a UTC shuttle, its engines whining as it touched down on the blasted earth. The hatch opened, revealing a group of high-ranking officers, their faces etched with worry and fatigue. Robertson and Hawkins were ushered into the shuttle, where they were debriefed by the officers. The news was grim. Reports were flooding in from across the galaxy of similar infestations, each one growing and spreading like a cancer. The UTC, already stretched thin by the mounting crisis, was struggling to contain the threat. As the shuttle lifted off, carrying them back to UTC space, Robertson and Hawkins collapsed into their seats, their bodies aching with exhaustion. They knew that they had won a victory against the progenitor, but it was a hollow one. The true scope of the threat was only now becoming clear. Days later, as they recovered from their wounds in a UTC medical facility, Robertson and Hawkins were approached by a figure cloaked in shadow. As he stepped into the light, they saw that he was a Gamelon, his scaly skin glinting in the harsh fluorescent light. "I am Zor-Tak," the Gamelon said, his voice a rasping whisper. "I was once part of the inner circle of the Gamelon leadership. I have information that can help you fight the progenitors." Robertson and Hawkins exchanged a wary glance. They had no reason to trust this Gamelon defector, but they were desperate for any advantage against their enemy. "What do you want in return?" Hawkins asked, his voice rough with suspicion. "Asylum," Zor-Tak replied. "Protection from my former masters. In exchange, I will tell you everything I know about the progenitors and their plans." Robertson and Hawkins hesitated for a moment before nodding their assent. They knew that they were taking a risk, but they had no choice. They needed Zor-Tak's information. And so, under cover of darkness, they smuggled Zor-Tak off the frontier colony and back to UTC space, where he was placed in protective custody. As they began to debrief him, the Gamelon revealed a truth that chilled them to their core. "The progenitors are not a single race," Zor-Tak said, his voice trembling with fear. "They are a collection of ancient, otherworldly beings, each with its own unique abilities and motivations." He went on to describe the different factions of the progenitors, each one more terrifying than the last. Some sought to assimilate all life into a single, unified consciousness, like the creature they had faced on the frontier colony. Others had even more sinister goals: the eradication of all organic life, the enslavement of entire species, or the transformation of the galaxy into a twisted, nightmarish hellscape. But Zor-Tak also revealed a glimmer of hope. The progenitors, for all their power, were not invincible. They had weaknesses that could be exploited. But to do so, the UTC would need to marshal all of its resources and allies, including the Gamelons themselves. Robertson and Hawkins listened to Zor-Tak's words, their minds racing with the implications. They knew that they were facing an enemy unlike any they had ever encountered before, an enemy that would stop at nothing to achieve its goals. But they also knew that they had no choice but to fight. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, and so, as they began to plan their next move, Robertson and Hawkins steeled themselves for the battles to come. They knew that the road ahead would be long and hard, filled with danger and sacrifice. But they also knew that they could not falter, could not fail. For in the face of such an implacable foe, there could be no surrender, no retreat, only the grim determination to fight on, to the bitter end. The small spacecraft carrying Robertson, Hawkins, and Zor-Tak sliced through the inky void, the distant stars blurred by the vessel's immense velocity. Inside, the three men sat in tense silence, each lost in their own thoughts as they hurtled towards their destination deep in Gamelon space. Zor-Tak, his scaly features illuminated by the glow of the navigational display, broke the silence. "We're approaching the rendezvous point," he said, his voice a rasping whisper. "The rebel faction should be waiting for us." Robertson nodded, his jaw set in a grim line. He knew that this mission was a gamble, a desperate play to gain an edge against the progenitors, but it was a gamble they had to take. The alternative was too horrifying to contemplate. As they neared the coordinates, the ship's sensors began to pick up strange readings. The space around them seemed to pulse and writhe, as if alive. Hawkins, his eyes narrowing, leaned forward in his seat. "What the hell is that?" he muttered, his gaze fixed on the view screen. Zortak's face paled, his scales standing out in stark contrast. "Progenitor biomass," he hissed, his claws tightening on the controls. "It's infested this entire region of space." The ship shuddered as it passed through a particularly dense patch of the biomass, its hull groaning under the strain. Robertson and Hawkins exchanged a look of grim understanding. They were flying into the heart of the enemy's territory. Suddenly, the comm system crackled to life, a distorted voice filling the cockpit. "Mayday! Mayday! This is Gamelon Outpost Zeta 9. We are under attack by a progenitor creature. Request immediate assistance." Robertson and Hawkins looked at each other, a silent conversation passing between them. They both knew that the outpost could hold valuable intelligence about the progenitors, intelligence that could turn the tide of the war. "Change course," Robertson said, his voice hard. "We're going to help them." Zortak looked like he wanted to argue, but a sharp glance from Hawkins silenced him. He nodded, his claws flying over the controls as he plotted a new course. As they approached the outpost, the true scale of the attack became clear. The station hung in space, its hull breached in a dozen places, the edges of the wounds pulsing with sickly organic growth. Gamelon fighters swarmed around the station, their weapons flashing as they tried to fend off the attacker. And there, in the midst of the chaos, was the progenitor creature. It was a nightmare given form, a writhing mass of tentacles and pulsating flesh that dwarfed the Gamelon ships. Its maw, a gaping chasm lined with rows of razor-sharp teeth, opened wide as it let out a roar that shook the very fabric of space. "Mother of God," Hawkins breathed, his face pale. "How are we supposed to fight that thing?" Robertson's jaw tightened, his hand reaching for the ship's weapon controls. "With everything we've got," he said, his voice grim, "and pray that it's enough." The ship dove into the fray, its advanced UTC weapons spitting fire as Robertson and Hawkins joined the battle. The creature lashed out with its tentacles, each one as thick as a starship's hull, battering the Gamelon fighters aside like toys. Robertson and Hawkins fought with grim determination, their weapons tearing into the creature's hide. But for every wound they inflicted, the creature seemed to shrug it off, its flesh knitting back together with terrifying speed. As they fought, Robertson noticed something strange. The creature seemed to be focusing its attacks on a specific area of the outpost, as if defending something. He frowned, his mind racing. "Zortak!" he shouted over the din of battle. "Pull up the outpost schematics. I need to know what's in that section." The Gamelon's claws flew over the controls, his eyes widening as he found what he was looking for. "It's a hidden laboratory," he said, his voice tight with tension. "And according to our intelligence, it houses a progenitor artifact of immense power." Robertson and Hawkins exchanged a look, a glimmer of hope in their eyes. If they could secure that artifact, it could change everything. "We need to get to that lab," Robertson said, his voice hard, "no matter the cost." They fought their way towards the outpost, the creature's tentacles lashing at them with every meter they gained. The hull of their ship groaned under the onslaught, warning lights flashing across the control panels. As they neared the airlock, they saw that the station was crawling with progenitor-controlled Gamelons, their bodies twisted and mutated by the alien biotechnology. Robertson and Hawkins grimaced, knowing that each one of these creatures had once been a living, breathing Gamelon. They blasted their way into the station, the corridors echoing with the sounds of battle. The progenitor-controlled Gamelons fought with a ferocity that was terrifying to behold, their claws and fangs tearing into the UTC soldiers' armor. But Robertson and Hawkins were relentless, their weapons flashing as they cut a path through the horde. They fought their way deeper into the station, following the schematics towards the hidden laboratory. Finally, they reached the lab, only to find it empty. The artifact, whatever it was, had been moved. Robertson slammed his fist against the wall in frustration, his mind racing as he tried to think of their next move. And then Hawkins saw it. A single cryptic message, etched into the wall in Gamelon script. He called Zortok over, the Gamelon's eyes widening as he deciphered the code. "It's from the rebels," Zortok said, his voice trembling with excitement. "They say that the artifact has been moved to a hidden base on a remote, uncharted planet. A base that holds the key to defeating the progenitors once and for all." Robertson and Hawkins looked at each other, their resolve hardening. They knew that this was their chance, perhaps their only chance, to turn the tide of the war. They fought their way back to their ship, the station collapsing around them as the progenitor creature redoubled its assault. They barely made it out, the ship's engines screaming as they blasted away from the dying outpost. As they set course for the hidden rebel base, Robertson couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that the progenitors, or something even worse, were one step ahead of them. But he pushed those thoughts aside, his jaw set in a grim line. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it. They had to. The fate of the galaxy depended on it. The shuttle shuddered as it descended through the uncharted planet's thick, murky atmosphere. Robertson gripped the controls, his eyes narrowing as he peered through the view screen. Beside him, Hawkins and Zortak studied the sensor readings, their faces etched with concern. "I'm picking up energy signatures that match progenitor technology," Hawkins said, his voice tight. "Whatever's down there, it's not friendly." Robertson nodded, his jaw set. He brought the shuttle in low, the landscape resolving into a desolate expanse of twisted, blackened terrain. A thick, oily substance coated the ground, pulsing and writhing as if alive. The shuttle touched down with a jolt. Robertson and Hawkins checked their weapons, the click of loading cartridges echoing in the confined space. Zortok, his scales glistening with nervous sweat, fingered his own Gamelon sidearm. They disembarked, the hiss of the shuttle's hatch giving way to an eerie, oppressive silence. The air was thick and heavy, laden with an acrid chemical stench. Robertson and Hawkins exchanged a glance, an unspoken acknowledgement of the danger they faced. They ventured deeper into the gloom, their boots squelching in the oily muck. Shapes loomed out of the mist, the ruins of a Gamelon settlement, its structures encrusted with pulsating progenitor biomass. Walls writhed and undulated, as if the very buildings were alive and breathing. Robertson and Hawkins moved cautiously, their weapons sweeping the ruins. Shadows flickered at the edges of their vision, darting away when they turned to look. Whispers seemed to echo from the empty buildings, sibilant and mocking. A sense of dread settled over them, a palpable weight that grew heavier with each step. Something was watching them, something ancient and malevolent. Suddenly a shriek pierced the gloom. Robertson spun, his rifle snapping up, but it was too late. A horde of creatures burst from the ruins, their bodies a nightmarish fusion of Gamelon and progenitor. They charged, howling with an inhuman hunger. Robertson and Hawkins opened fire, their weapons tearing into the abominations. But for every creature that fell, two more seemed to take its place. They fought with a desperate ferocity, but it was a losing battle. Just as they were about to be overwhelmed, a barrage of energy bolts seared the air. The creatures recoiled, screeching in pain and rage. Robertson looked up to see a group of Gamelons emerging from the mist, their weapons blazing. The leader, a grizzled warrior with a face like carved granite, strode forward. "I am Korzak," he said, his voice a guttural rasp. "We've been expecting you." Robertson and Hawkins lowered their weapons, relief and suspicion warring on their faces. Korzak led them away from the ruins, into a hidden tunnel that plunged deep beneath the planet's surface. They emerged in a vast, underground cavern, the heart of the Gamelon rebel base. Korzak brought them before a shimmering, pulsating portal, its surface swirling with an otherworldly energy. "This is the key to the progenitor's power," Korzak said, his eyes glinting in the portal's eerie light. "They use it to travel between dimensions, to spread their influence and assimilate worlds. If we destroy it, we cut off their access to our universe." Robertson and Hawkins exchanged a glance, the enormity of the task settling on their shoulders. They knew they were facing not just the progenitors, but the full might of the Gamelon Empire. But as they began to plan their assault, A chill ran down their spines. They couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, and that something even more terrifying than the progenitors was waiting for them on the other side of the portal. Robertson, Hawkins, Zortak, and the Gamelon rebels charged forward, pulse rifles blazing as they cut through the hordes of progenitor creatures and Gamelon warriors that stood between them and the portal. The air was thick with the stench of burnt flesh and ozone, the ground slick with blood and ichor. They fought with grim determination, pushing ever closer to their goal even as their numbers dwindled. Hawkins grunted as a progenitor creature's claw glanced off his armor, leaving a deep gouge in the hardened plate. He whirled, his rifle spitting a burst of plasma that vaporized the creature's head. Beside him, Robertson fought with a cold, methodical fury, his every movement precise and deadly. He had seen too much, lost too many friends to let anything stand in his way now. As they neared the portal, a chill ran down their spines. A massive figure loomed out of the shadows, a behemoth of flesh and metal that seemed to radiate an aura of pure malevolence. It was a progenitor creature, but one unlike any they had faced before. Its very presence seemed to sap their will, filling their minds with visions of despair and hopelessness. Robertson and Hawkins exchanged a glance, a silent communication passing between them. They had come too far to falter now. With a thought, they activated the Gamelon mind-link technology that Zortak had given them, their consciousnesses merging into a single, unified whole. Together, they faced the creature, their combined strength and determination the only thing keeping them from succumbing to its influence. They fought with a savage intensity, their movements perfectly synchronized as they dodged and weaved around the creature's attacks. But even with their combined might, it was a losing battle. The creature was too strong, too resilient. They could feel their strength waning, their minds beginning to fray under the onslaught of the creature's psychic assault. And then Zortak was there, a fierce light burning in his eyes. He held a pulsating device in his hand, a powerful explosive of Gamelon design. With a roar of defiance, he charged at the creature, ignoring the wounds that peppered his body. The creature lashed out, its claws tearing through Zortak's flesh like paper. But the Gamelon warrior did not falter. With a final, desperate effort, he plunged the explosive into the creature's chest and detonated it. The explosion was blinding, a searing wave of heat and light that engulfed the creature and Zortak alike. When the smoke cleared, the creature was gone, reduced to a pile of charred flesh and twisted metal. But Zortak lay broken and bleeding, his life ebbing away with each ragged breath. Robertson and Hawkins knelt beside him, their faces etched with grief. "Destroy the portal," Zortak whispered, his voice a ragged gasp. "End this, once and for all." With those final words, the light faded from his eyes, and he was gone. Robertson and Hawkins bowed their heads, a moment of silence for their fallen comrade. Then, with heavy hearts and grim determination, they fought their way to the portal's control room. What they found there shook them to their core. The truth behind the progenitors, the nature of the portal itself, it was almost too much to bear, but they knew what they had to do. With trembling hands, they activated the portal's self-destruct sequence, the countdown ticking away like the beats of a dying heart. Then they turned and ran, fighting their way back through the hordes of enemies that stood between them and their ship. The planet shook and bucked beneath their feet, the very ground beginning to tear itself apart as the portal collapsed in on itself. They barely made it to their ship in time, the shockwave from the portal's destruction hot on their heels.
If you finished this story, please subscribe and like the video. Then leave a comment that says, "I liked the story," and I will heart every single one of them. It really helps me. Thank you for your time.